Hi. It's not clear exactly when our civilizations began. The accepted timeline is that there was an explosion of knowledge around the Nile, Euphrates and Indus rivers in Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago. But there are structures all over the planet that undermine this assertion. There's evidence of the weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure dated to some 10,000 years ago. Seeing as the pyramids are most likely contemporaneous, it's not known how they were built, given that we could not construct them with today's technology. Göbekli Tepe has been dated at around 12,000 years old and is by some accounts an ancient astronomical observatory. There is no date for the construction of the Moai on Easter Island. Now, this might seem a bit obscure on a series on Hatha, but stay with me. What we do know is that the Vedas, where our original knowledge of yoga come from, were created sometime between the 17th and 11th centuries BCE, that is somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. Now compare this with the idea of Moses, who was potentially a mythical figure encapsulating several religious and cultural ideals, was supposed to be alive in the 13th century BCE, around 3,500 years ago. What I find interesting is that these two strands have something in common, possibly hinting at a common, older source, given their geographical distance. What I'm going to look at today is the ethical precept of the Vedas as codified by Patanjali around 400 BCE and the 10 Commandments of the Old Testament. So here we are, the 10 Commandments. These are from the King James Bible version. There are many versions, many different orders to them and slightly different wording, but these are the most common 10 commandments that you will see, and I think they'll be familiar to everybody. What I find particularly interesting is that if these precepts did come down from an earlier civilization, it's my contention that they've been modified to suit the people, the tribe at the time that encoded them. If you look at the first four, or first five even, they're not that universal in their truths. If this was originally came from God, it's a strange kind of God. Just from the top, you shall have no other gods before me, and the God of the Bible is the only God. There are no other gods. So this first rule, that he shouldn't have any other gods, immediately recognizes the existence of other gods. So it's a little bit self-defeating. This second one, you shall make no idols. I see no reason, I don't see how the universe is a better place, how an all-seeing, all-powerful God would say, you should not make a graven image of me. It doesn't seem to add anything to human society. I see nothing wrong with a bit of idolatry. This third one does not seem to be the edict of an all-powerful, omniscient Lord. Don't take my name in vain. This does not in any way add to civil society. This does nothing to improve the human condition. It seems like a very jealous God, a little bit insecure. Keeping the seventh day of the week as holy, or making it a rest day, is not a bad idea for society. I believe that it's a good idea that we have one day where we really do rest and we catch up. If you look at the Yamas, which we're not going to do in this video, there is one about studying scripture, and this possibly could be a throwback to that, where that one day is not engaged in the physical labours and activities of survival, but is set aside for study and for getting closer to your God. This fifth exhortation to honour your father and your mother, there's no harm in that. It's not a bad thing to recognise your culture, your ancestors, to recognise where you come from, and to have a little bit of respect for your mother and father and do their bidding, certainly while you're in their house. But this also seems like it was written by a human in order to control his offspring, when, of course, offspring want to go off into the world and do their own thing. To honour your father and your mother seems a little bit of... it seems a little bit pointless. It doesn't, again, contribute much to the wealth of human society. It is with these second five that I think we're getting somewhere. These are some of the things that a God might tell his children in order that they live better lives and have better society. For sure, murder's not much use to a civil society. Commit adultery is not a good thing. Absolutely, we should not steal. Bearing false witness against your neighbour is self-destructive and harmful, and covetousness is not a good trait. These 5 are the 5 that I want to focus on, and where their roots are and how they compare to the Yamas. So here you see the Yamas and Niyamas. These are the first 2 of the 8 limbs of yoga as codified by Patanjali. It's the first 5 that I'm particularly interested in because these are classed as universal truths. These are how everyone should behave if we want to have a good society. Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya and Aparigraha. These are the 5 that I want to make a direct comparison. The Niyamas, which are more exhortations to the individual and how the individual should behave, are very interesting, and they're possibly the subject of another video. But this particular video is looking at these first 5 and the second 5 of the commandments of the Old Testament. So here again are the second 5 of the 10 commandments that we're particularly interested in today. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, not bear false witness, and you shall not covet. Quite useful to have. Now, here are the Yamas. This is the first 5 things that Patanjali tells us in the 8 limbs of yoga. Ahimsa, non-violence. Satya, truthfulness. Asteya, not stealing. Brahmacharya, the right use of energy. And Aparigraha, non-greed or non-hoarding. We are going to go into these in a bit more detail later on, but for now I just want to put them either side of those last 5 commandments that we talked about, the ones that seem to really get to the heart of how people should live in order to improve their society. And as they go side by side, they're a little bit mixed up, so these are how I think they line up. Ahimsa, non-violence, does tie up with thou shalt not murder, and Satya goes with not bearing false witness, and so on. So here you see them properly alongside as I see them, and we're going to go into them a bit more detail, but those are the commandments on the right, and tidied up now we see a direct comparison between the Yamas and the second 5 of the Old Testament commandments. Now the very first rule from Patanjali is Ahimsa, non-harming or non-violence in thought, word and deed. Now this is basically one of the best rules you can have for humanity, because it doesn't just apply to others, it applies to yourself as well. The idea is that you are not violent towards yourself. Now, especially in today's society, we're all guilty of this. We've always got that negative self-talk. We're harsh with our judgment of ourselves. And this ahimsa does start with us. And from treating ourselves well, we go on further to treat others with the same respect and love that we expect to be treated ourselves. Non-violence extends out from our family, from our society, from our village, to the whole of humanity. And it's important that it's word, thought and deed. Look at them in reverse order. In deed, obviously you should not be violent in the physical world to yourself or to anyone else. But violence can take the form of words. Now, there's a lot of talk on the internet and social media about words having power and against the idea of freedom of speech. Now, I believe that freedom of speech does include harmful words, because that's just the nature of free speech. However, in a perfect world, we wouldn't allow this, or we wouldn't want to do it. We wouldn't want it for others, and we wouldn't want it for ourselves. So non-violence in word is also important for the enlightened soul. And lastly, in thought, having malicious thoughts against yourself or against others is harmful to yourself. And again, Patanjali is trying to put us on the right path towards being an enlightened being. And you start with yourself. You're kind to yourself in thought, word and deed, and you are kind to everyone else in thought, word and deed, because negative emotions and negative actions are going to stop us on our path towards enlightenment. What I find very interesting about this particular commandment from Moses is that it just says, "You shall not murder." Now, ostensibly that's the same thing, it's non-violence, but it's not really. It stops short of really giving you any kind of instruction aside from murder, which you could, if you want to be pedantic, you could say, oh, everything up until murder is just fine then, so all other kinds of violence are fine. And given the extreme violence and murder that we see in the Old Testament, this would seem to be borne out. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that at all. It is a good rule not to murder, obviously, but I think in order to create a decent society and to move us as a species towards enlightenment, Ahimsa works way better. And I think that the original, wherever this all came from, I think that the Vedas conveyed it better. They preserved the knowledge, the intention a lot better than the commandments did. You shall not murder. Yes, it's good. It just doesn't go far enough. The second of the Yamas is Satya, truthfulness. And its correlation in the commandments is, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbour. And I think these are very similar. But whereas with Ahimsa it was way more specific in the Yamas, this is a very blanket statement for Satya. It's just truthfulness. The implication is that you're true to yourself, you're true to others. There are no acts of commission or omission, as in, you can play the game of not strictly telling a lie, but you're not conveying the full truth. And Satya is designed for you to be truthful. And this is one of the rules that you have to just take in upon yourself and use it as a guiding principle in your life to get the full benefit from it. For me personally, truthfulness is being honest to yourself as much as anything else, because these are rules for living. As I said, these 5 rules would make for a perfect society, but they start with you. It's every one of us that has to live these rules. The commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbour, again seems a bit specific, unless you take your neighbour to be everybody that you meet in life. Your neighbours, people in your village, anyone you come across. It just seems oddly specific. This next one, asteya, I find there's a direct correlation between the two. In the Yamas it's just non-stealing, and in the commandments of the Old Testament, you shall not steal. I think it's the same thing, and it's a very good precept for life, because we all do it. There's no getting away from it. If you want to follow this commandment or this Yama from Patanjali of asteya, you will apply this in everyday life. The example that was given to me was that we were all sitting in philosophy class, and I'm sitting next to my buddy, and we've been friends, we've been in the school for a couple of months, and what's mine is his and his is mine, and he goes off to the bathroom and I borrow his pen. I take his pen, and I didn't wait till he comes back to ask him, but I needed a pen. He was only gone a couple of minutes. He would say it's fine anyway. Strictly speaking, and this may sound pedantic till I explain it, that's theft. I didn't ask his permission. There may have been a reason why he would have said no. There's every chance that he would have said, yes, of course, my pen is your pen, please keep it. But here's another scenario. I take his pen, absent-mindedly, we forget the class, and I just put it in my bag and I take it with me, or I leave it in the classroom somewhere. Either way, he's down one pen. And then he sits there after the class and he thinks, that was a nice pen, that has some meaning to me, that was given to me by another friend, or I bought it in a particular place and it had memories for me, and somebody's taken it. And that can be deeply upsetting for my friend. He's lost a pen, he doesn't understand, he feels violated, he feels, pissed off because something's been stolen from him. And effectively, I have stolen it. Now, the alternative way to respond in accordance with the precept of asteya is to wait till he comes back and say, can I borrow your pen, mine's just run out. And he says, of course you can, please, and when you're done, keep it, because you're my brother and I love you. But you see the subtle difference. And if we're going to take these precepts to heart, if we're really going to follow the teachings, whether you're a Christian, you follow the commandments, or whether you're a yogi on the path towards samadhi, this is something we should take very seriously. Another example would be everybody goes to a hotel and we nick the slippers, or we take the soap, or some people steal the bathrobes, which is really a bit over the top, but it's still theft. The hotel manager, his budget goes up, the price of hotels could potentially go up because you're stealing stuff. Actually, it is a problem. I have friends in the hotel business, and it is a massive problem. The theft of things from the room is it's unbelievable. Another closer to home example will be when you are in the office and you use the office, you print some personal documents. Now, almost every company will have rules against this, but we all do it. But strictly speaking, if you want to follow the precepts to the letter, you wouldn't do it. Now, that seems like a victimless crime, but then again, I don't know. It's all adding to the bottom line of a company. It's all adding to their costs, which affects all of us. It affects the customers of the company. It affects you as an employee. So if you really want to follow these precepts, you don't do it. You keep pure and clean and simple, and you don't nick. This next one is quite often misinterpreted. Brahmacharya, celibacy. And everybody says that we have to basically keep it in our pants. Yes and no, because Brahmacharya was the student. It was a stage of a student's life where he was, before being married, he should divert all his attention and his efforts into his studies. And if you look up the Sanskrit for Brahmacharya, it's chastity, the unmarried student, continence, and study of the Vedas. Another interesting aspect of this word is that the first part of it is Brahma. Brahma is the supreme spirit or creator. So Brahmacharya is bringing you closer to the Godhead, if you like. But it is about conserving your energy and using your sexual energy in the right way. There is a whole branch of yoga, the tantrics, which does focus on this and how to reuse that energy. But for the rest of us, it's just not wasting your energy on sexual pursuits. When it was written, the idea was that within marriage, because very traditional society, within marriage, sex was fine, absolutely, in the production of children, but also between a man and his wife. And unfortunately, that is how it was viewed at the time. But the idea of this, Brahmacharya, celibacy, and as a rule for life, for the rest of society, it is a good idea. I have no problem with people who fall out of love and what they call them serial monogamists. If you don't love anyone anymore and you want to be with someone else, that's absolutely fine. But the idea of multiple partners and this seeming trend that there is now for polyamory, which I think is psychologically destructive for both partners, or all 3 or 4 or 5 partners, whatever the case may be. I think a return to a more traditional lifestyle and a more traditional view of sex as being within the sanctity of some sort of formal union is much more productive. The commandment, "You shall not commit adultery," is saying the same sort of thing. It's just talking about the act of sex with another person outside of your marriage. Whereas the Brahmacharya is the right use of energy. It's talking about redirecting that energy. Now again, this was aimed at students. It's a certain aspect or stage of a student's life before he or she is married and he's studying. That sexual energy is extremely potent. It is a life force, and in men it's a driven force. If you can turn that energy into something more useful, like the tantrics do, that's where this is aiming for. For the rest of us, it's just a good idea not to screw around. This last of the 5 yamas, Aparigraha, non-greed or non-hoarding, there is a difference between that and the 5th of the commandments that we're looking at, "You shall not covet." And I think there's a very distinct and important difference here. On the one hand, the Yama is saying non-greed and non-hoarding. It's not saying that acquisition itself is bad, because there are other parts of yogic philosophy which tell us that we do have to exist in the world and that we have to do well, and business is perfectly acceptable. You have to provide for yourself and your family, and working is extremely important, and karma yoga is action yoga. It's an important part of life. But the commandment says you shall not covet, and this is more of a mental exercise. You should not covet other things. You should not be covetous. But that to me suggests that it's wrong to want things. Now, maybe it's wrong to want a big sports car, but if you're working and you want to live somewhere nice, you want to provide for your family, you do want a nice vehicle that gets you around, it's not a bad thing in itself to have these thought processes, and it's going to make you work hard so the end result is good. The you shall not covet feels like thought control. It feels very much like you shouldn't have bad thoughts, and that goes with the other 5 of the 10 commandments that we rejected for being a jealous God. You shall not covet is telling you you should not look at other things and want them, but that is a very natural part of human nature. What you do with the covetousness is vitally important. You don't lead it to cause you to make wrong actions. But non-greed and non-hoarding is an excellent advice for humans, because once you've satisfied your needs, you don't need to be greedy. You don't need to hoard. You've satisfied your requirements for you and your family. Getting any more than this is when it causes problems, because for every rich man there's 100 poor men. So Aparigraha is just telling you, by all means, go out in the world and acquire things and work for a living, but just don't be greedy about it. And I think that's a good rule for life. So there you have it. Those are the 5 yamas. This is where Patanjali starts with the 8 limbs of yoga. This is how you get yourself right before you even get on the mat. In our modern world, you could argue that they are not relevant. My contention is that they're more relevant than ever. Our society seems to be going to hell in lots of different ways, and the differences between us seem to be growing ever larger. And I think if we can behave like this in ourselves, these 5 basic precepts will keep our society. Can you imagine if everybody in the world behaved like that? It would be immediately the end of all of our problems. They're so simple, and yet they are so unfeasibly difficult to carry out in our own life. But I think we have a duty to try. So every time you get on your mat, while you're contorting yourself into some weird shape and trying to balance on one leg and not feel daft, have a little bit of time to think about these. And when you practice your meditation, they're good things to focus on just before you start your meditation. As a mantra, you can repeat them. But even if you never do yoga, even if you never get on a mat, there is something to be said about this ancient wisdom that could really touch us as a species, us as a society, and each and every one of us as an individual. Hari Om.